I'm honored and very pleased to be here to tell you about my father's life of defiance and resistance during the Holocaust. Herman Wygoda was a 33-year-old civil engineer living in Warsaw the day the Germans invaded Poland. He survived by assuming a false identity, first in Poland, then in Germany, and finally in Italy, where he was a resistance fighter until the end of the war. But his resistance didn't end there, because early on, he realized the importance of bearing witness to future generations. So in 1945, he wrote his memoir of the Holocaust while all the events were still fresh in his mind. He came to the United States in 1946 and started a new life as a family in Chattanooga, Tennessee. That's where I'm from. But let me show you his memoir. This is it. It's written in Polish. I can't read in Polish, but I can make out one word in there. Right here, Treblinka. And it appears in one other place a little higher up. And as all of you know, Treblinka was one of those 6 death camps that the Nazis built in Poland with the express purpose of murdering Jews. Well, when my father came to the U.S., he couldn't speak any English at all. 20 years later, he translated his memoir himself into English. And he died in 1982. Years later, his memoir was published by the University of Illinois Press. And this is his book. It's titled In the Shadow of the Swastika, and you see my father was the author. I'm down as the editor because I edited his English language version. And the foreword was written by noted Holocaust historian Michael Berenbaum. Now, over here is another version of that book. It's the Italian language edition of the same book. A historical research society in Savona, Italy, the province of Savona, Italy, and that's where my father's resistance activity was. They translated the book into Italian and published it not for sale, but to give away to schools throughout the province of Savona so that their future generations would know who Herman Wygoda was. Herman Wygoda was born in Offenbach, Germany on November 18, 1906 to Polish parents, Hanna and Meyer Wygoda. That's how Wygoda is pronounced in Europe. His mother, Hanna, is the lady holding his hand. The other lady was one of her sisters. Her name was Golda. Now, Hanna came from a huge family. She had 9 brothers and sisters. 2 of them immigrated to the United States before the Holocaust, and they survived. One of her brothers died before the Holocaust, but Hanna and all her other brothers and sisters were murdered during the Holocaust. Now, at some point, the family moved from Offenbach to Berlin. Now, we know almost nothing about his father, Meyer, other than he was killed in World War I. Now, after his death, Hanna took Herman and his little brother, Leon, back to her hometown of Kossow, Poland, a little town 50 miles northeast of Warsaw. This is a picture of Leon with Hanna taken in the 1930s. Now, Leon, he remained in Kossow, working as a cabinet maker. But my father, after spending a few years in the Polish army as a lieutenant, he attended Warsaw Polytechnic Institute and became an engineer. He took his first job back in Germany, in Berlin. But he left in 1929 to come back to Poland because of the rising anti-Semitism that was going on in Germany. In Poland, he married. And the couple had a son, Samuel, shown here. Samuel was my half-brother. He was born in 1934.
Mark, can you speak into the microphone or grab that?
My daughter.
Yeah, people online are having a hard time hearing.
I'm sorry.
No.
Born in 1934, but the couple later separated. And my father raised Samuel himself with the help of his mother. Now, the three of them lived in a downtown Warsaw apartment. Now, in the summer of 1939, my father knew war was coming. And he also knew that when the Germans took over Poland, the Jews there would suffer the same terrible fate that German Jews had been experiencing in Germany ever since it came to power in 1933. My father knew what had been happening in Germany because he would listen to international news on his shortwave radio. He was aware of the vicious propaganda aimed against Jews. He was aware of the increasingly severe laws that were enacted by the German government against Jews, and he was aware of what happened in Kristallnacht. The fact that thousands of Jewish businesses were destroyed and hundreds of synagogues burned to the ground and tens of thousands of Jewish men arrested and sent to concentration camps. He knew all that. So he thought it'd be far safer if his son and his mother were with his brother Leon and his family in that little town of Kossow rather than in the giant metropolis of Warsaw. So he took them there, and then he returned to Warsaw where he was working. Well, Germans invaded in September 1st, 1939. In his memoir, my father chronicles the events involving the aerial bombardment of Warsaw and the artillery barrage that followed, and also the panic and the death and the destruction that took place in the city after the city's surrender. He watched German troops arriving by train to take part in their victory parade that they put on for Hitler in October. Well, he said that almost immediately the Germans started issuing anti-Jewish laws in Warsaw. He said the very first one, he said, ordered all Jews to turn in their radios to their local police stations under penalty of death. And he said he saw out in the street men, women, and children carrying radios of what he called different vintages, and larger radios being transported in push carts. He decided to hold on to his shortwave radio, at least for the time being. He refused to obey all the subsequent anti-Jewish laws, like the wearing of an armband with the Star of David. Instead, he went underground, so to speak, assuming the identity of a Catholic Pole, but not just an ordinary Catholic Pole. No, my father posed as a Volksdorfer. The Volksdorf, literally German folk, these were ethnic Germans, Aryan ancestry, who lived in other countries, not in Germany, so they weren't German citizens. But the Germans considered them the next best thing. They gave them special privileges and they held them in a high regard. My father got away with it. He said, thanks to his language skills. When he needed to, he could speak German with an accent of someone from Berlin. And then other times, he pretended he didn't know German at all. He spoke Polish with a Polish accent. But he could no longer work as the engineer. He has now a false identity. So he became a smuggler. He had two business partners in the smuggling operation, a furrier and a jeweler who lived in the old Jewish section of downtown Warsaw. What he would do he would take some of their goods out into the countryside to sell them and use the money to buy food to help provide for his family back in the little town of Kossow, and also smuggle that food into Warsaw to help his friends, who he said were in desperate need of his help. His friends included the wife of a good friend of his who had been killed. The man had been killed in the early stages of the war, and their daughter. And here's a picture of their daughter. We don't know her name. My father didn't name her in his memoir, but he did say that she was the same age as his son. The little girl and her mother and his two business partners, they all lived in the part of downtown Warsaw that became the Warsaw Ghetto. Now, in this picture of the Warsaw Ghetto, I want you to focus on the wall that's surrounding the ghetto. In the spring of 1940, my father said that there were rumors going around that the Germans were going to separate the Jews of Warsaw from the rest of the population, and also rumors that these strange walls were being built in different parts of the downtown. And he was curious, so he went exploring, and he found what he called 10-foot high wall sections being built in different parts of downtown. He couldn't make any sense of it at all. He asked a mason at one of the construction sites what the walls were for, and the man told him he didn't know. Well, in the summer of 1940, he said the walls were going up at a much faster pace. And he wrote in his memoir, what in the spring had appeared to be a crossword puzzle with scattered pieces now began to look like a medieval fortress. But no medieval fortress had ever covered so much territory. In some places, the walls ran down the centers of streets right between streetcar tracks. In other places, whole rows of apartment buildings had their gates blocked up with bricks. Well, he continued his smuggling operation even after the ghetto was completely sealed off from the rest of the city in November 1940. Well, he never really said in his memoir exactly how he got into and got out of that ghetto, only that he used what he called holes in the wall that were reserved for professional smugglers only. But he did write about what he saw as he walked the ghetto streets, especially the dead and the dying out on the sidewalks beginning in the fall of 1941. Every time he left, he wondered whether he would have the courage to go back in there again because of all this misery that he was seeing. But he said the ghetto pulled him in like a magnet. He kept up his ghetto smuggling operation even after that little girl and her mother had died. He was now taking the potatoes and other food items he smuggled in to feed starving children that were lying out on the sidewalks. He said they looked like miniature skeletons with glassy eyes set deep in bony sockets with an expression of hopeful expectation. Now, this is a map that my father drew when he was translating his memoir into English. You see in the lower left, the city of Warsaw, and notice he spelled it the way it's spelled in Polish. And the other places are cities and little towns that he referred to in his memoir, and they are linked together by railroad tracks. The little town where his family were now confined to a ghetto was Kossow, right there. And notice how close Kossow was to the Treblinka death camp. It's 7 miles away. Now, at this point in time in my father's story, that camp was not operational yet. It was constructed in the spring and early summer of 1942, but it wasn't working at this time in my story of his life. So what he would do, he would take a train from Warsaw to Kossow, and in between his smuggling trips, he would stay with his family for up to 2 weeks at a time inside the Kossow ghetto. But one day, when he was there, he had a run-in with the Polish police. They knew he was a smuggler. They figured he had lots of money that they wanted. Of course, he didn't have much money at all, but he wouldn't give them anything. They beat him up. They threw him in jail. And after a few days, they took him by train to a much, much larger town, a city located 10 miles away, Sokolov,
right there. They put him in the Jewish ghetto and told him to stay. He was not about to stay, of course. He resumed his smuggling operation to Warsaw, but he could not afford to be seen in Kassa anymore. If the Polish police would have spotted him, they would have killed him, and probably his family too. So he took a roundabout way to get back and forth between now Sokolov and Warsaw. The other tracks going off in this direction eventually led to Warsaw. Well, in July of 1942, his usual trip to the Warsaw Ghetto turned out to be not usual at all. When he arrived, a friend of his gave him a warning. And I have a picture of his friend. His name was Stanislaw Gorczyca. He was a true Catholic Pole. He was also a postal worker. And Stanislaw warned him that if he was going to go into the ghetto again, this time he needed to be extremely cautious. It told him that strange things were happening at the railroad station closest to the ghetto, that the Germans were assembling all available freight cars there. And strangely enough, they were covering up the air vents on those cars with heavy boards and barbed wire. Nobody knew what was going on except, of course, the Germans. Well, nevertheless, he went in. But he said this time the situation was very different. There was a lot more tension in the air. And whenever a German patrol was spotted, everyone ran for cover. He along with them. And he asked the people, what's going on? And they told him that lately those German patrols had been shooting into the crowds indiscriminately. Well, then he saw in the distance what looked like a large group of Jewish men and women being led by Germans, and everybody ran. He barely made it into an apartment building before the door was slammed shut behind him. Every once in a while, he was able to make his way through that crowded lobby to the front door to look through one of the peepholes. And he said what he saw outside was a column of Jewish men and women, about 18 to 20 people wide, being marched in the direction of the railroad station by German soldiers with bayonets fixed to their rifles. He said it took about 40 minutes for this whole procession to pass by. Then he went back out into the street and continued on his way to the place where he usually took the food items, only be caught up in another crowd of people running. And this time he witnessed the murder of a young Jewish man out on the sidewalk by a Nazi SS officer who shot him in the back of the head. Well, that convinced him it was just far too dangerous to be in there. So he left, never to go back. And what he had witnessed was the very beginning of the deportation of ghetto residents. He assumed they were being taken and put in those freight cars, but he didn't know after that where they were, being taken. He didn't know Treblinka at that time was operational, even when it was operational then. Well, he didn't go back to the Sokolov ghetto. Instead, he went to Stanislaw's house. And Stanislaw told his wife that my father was a distant cousin and he needed a place to stay. And so they allowed him to stay there. And it seemed to be working out. And he began to wonder if it would be possible to get his son Samuel there too, to live with Stanislaw's house. He talked to Stanislaw about it. Stanislaw agreed, not just to let the boy stay there, but to help my father get him out of that ghetto in Kosovo and bring him to Warsaw. So one night, the two men boarded a passenger train on the way to Kosovo. My father was now in disguise. He had grown a beard, and he was wearing Stanislaw's postal uniform to help disguise himself. Now I'm going to show you that map again. They were now leaving Warsaw, going up toward, as you see, the town Malkinia. They had to change trains in Malkinia to go to Kosovo, but the trains weren't running. So they started walking along the tracks. They joined a group of smugglers that were walking also. When they approached the railroad station at Treblinka, which was on the main line, they found out why the trains weren't running. On the tracks were several freight trains stalled, waiting their chance to take that turn to go into the Treblinka death camp, which was about a mile off the main line. So they took to a road about 30 feet away from the railroad track and walked along. There were guards patrolling the sides of the train. I think he said they were Lithuanian guards, but they paid no attention to the men. And as they walked along, my father heard people inside the freight cars. He said he heard children crying. He heard adults begging for water and others praying. Now, as they walked along, my father and Stanislaw and what he called those otherwise hard-boiled smugglers, that's the term he used, they were all crying what they were hearing. Well, they made it into Kosovo, got Samuel, took him back to Warsaw, but it didn't work out. Neighbors were getting suspicious and started asking questions, and my father knew that the penalty for being caught in Poland hiding a Jew was death to the entire family, followed by burning down the family home. And so he didn't want to risk Stanislaw and his family, so he took Samuel back toward Kosovo, but he didn't take him into the Kosovo ghetto. Instead, he left him in the care of a farmer friend, a Mr. Zielinski, who had a farm somewhere out in the countryside. And then he started making his way back to Warsaw. But on his return to Warsaw, he was shot in the leg, wounded. He made it back to Warsaw. He almost died of gangrene poisoning. And while he was recovering, his whole family, his mother, his son, his brother's family, they were all taken to Treblinka and killed. And his inability to do anything to save them had haunted him for the rest of his life. Well, sometime after that, he found himself working at a German military camp in the town called Terespol. It's the next, it's way over here. Terespol. And he was working alongside another Jewish man who was hiding in plain sight, just like he was. This is, oh, wrong button. There we go. This is the man. His name was Leon Henegal. And together, the two men made a really good team to help assure their mutual survival. Leon's contribution came because before the war, he was a photographic laboratory technician and an artist. And with his skills, he could doctor stolen ID cards beyond detection. This is an ID card that was carried by Leon in 1943. And that's Leon's picture on it. Look how absolutely evil he looks in that picture. That was, of course, done on purpose. Who would suspect that was a Jew? You know, my father referred to Leon as a master of disguise. He produced fake IDs for my father as well. My father's contribution came from his language skills combined with his bold nature. He was incredibly bold. And I'm going to give you an example of how that saved their lives. Someone at the camp they were working at became suspicious of them and contacted the Gestapo. But a friend warned them. So they left. They got on a passenger train bound for Warsaw. But along the way, they received word that the Germans were taking people off the trains at a railroad stop at a town called Lukov. And my father knew what was going on. This was now the spring of 1943. Germans were facing a labor shortage back at their war factories in Germany, and they certainly were not importing any Jews into Germany at all. So what they did to fill their labor shortages, they resorted to making slave raids into Poland and taking back ordinary Polish citizens, most of whom were Catholic, into slavery. So at the last stop before Lukov, he got out of the train and he and Leon stood there on the platform. They were looking around and he spotted in the middle of that train that they were on, there were two passenger cars reserved exclusively for German citizens. No hesitation. He walked up to one of those cars. And after speaking with the guard, He was let in, Leon right behind him. Okay, inside there were 4 Germans, 2 businessmen, 2 military men. He greeted them all with a Nazi salute. And then he and Leon sat down, made themselves comfortable. Now, my father, at times like this, my father would immediately start talking to the Germans while Leon would sit there holding the side of his face, pretending he had a toothache so he didn't have to talk. He didn't know much German at all, and he didn't have a German accent. So as the train pulled into Lukow, station Lukow, my father said he and the Germans were engaged in what he called a loud and lively conversation. This is the station. It still exists today. The train they were on was now stopped on those tracks. German soldiers lined both sides of the train, allowing no place to escape. And as soon as the train stopped, a loudspeaker came on, issuing orders, first in German and then in Polish. Well, in Polish, the passengers were told, everyone leave the train, leave the doors to your compartment wide open, take all your belongings with you, report to the main waiting room in the station, failure to obey, you'll be shot to death. But the message in German had been different. In German, passengers were told, stay in your cars, lock your doors, don't let anyone in, we'll be leaving shortly. So as those 4 Polish folks were leaving the train, my father Leon was sitting there with the Germans, and soon the train took off to Warsaw. Well, soon after that, the 2 men went to what has to be the last place you'd expect Jews to go to seek refuge in Nazi-occupied Europe. And of course, that would be Berlin. Why Berlin? Well, Jews are not supposed to go there. So they went. In the foreword to my father's memoir, Michael Berenbaum stated, safety is often found in the eye of the storm. And that's right where they went. There, they worked for a labor company owned by 2 German businessmen, both of whom were members of the Nazi Party. My father talked about the swastika emblems that they wore on their lapels. They liked my father. They really liked my father. He worked for them in various roles. At times, he was a translator, at times a foreman, and at times an armed courier taking company money and documents to different places. Leon worked for them as a draftsman. Well, in his role as courier, he once took a trip to far northern Finland to a mining camp. And on that particular trip, he took with him a teenage Jewish boy who they had discovered among a group of newly recruited company workers, and with fake documents filled out just the right way by Leon. That boy was now working in a relatively safe place. In his role as translator, he was assigned to a mining camp under construction in Estonia near the town of Jovi, but deep in the woods. After just a few days, he contacted his bosses and asked if they would send Leon also. He claimed Leon was his cousin and liked to have him around. And like I said, the men liked my father. They sent Leon. So at first, the 2 men thought about trying to escape to the Russian front, of all places. But they gave up on that idea. A couple of other workers tried to do that, but they were caught by local hunters, returned to the camp where they were hanged to death. Well, after about 6 weeks, my father asked for and received permission to take a leave of absence for a few days. In his memoir, he said he wanted to go to Warsaw for 2 reasons. One, to see his friends, but also, number 2, to see if he could help get anyone out of what he called that terrible place. Well, his arrival in Warsaw corresponded with the final week of the Warsaw Ghetto Revolt. And the day he arrived, which was May 12, 1943, that was the day the Germans set fire to the ghetto. For 4 days, he watched what he called that desperate but unequal fight through a window from a friend's apartment, a friend named Frank, who lived right across the street from the ghetto. Then, with the help of Frank and his other friend Stanislaw and the Polish underground, he got hold of two teenage Jewish boys with false documents supplied by the underground and took them back to Yobi with him. Left them at the camp. Well, it wasn't long after that that he and Leon were reassigned to the company headquarters back in Berlin. And there, he was constantly reminded of the dangerous situation they were in, because right upstairs from their company office in that downtown office building, there was a Gestapo unit. And he would pass the agents going up and down the stairwells every day. He was terribly frightened, but he never showed a trace of fear that would have given him away. Well, he and Leon decided they had to get out of Germany. Sooner or later, they were going to be discovered. Well, their ticket out of Germany, so to speak, came thanks to the Allies, who were now bombing Berlin. After one particular bombing raid, the company they worked for was given the contract to clear out the rubble of a bombed out government building that had not caught on fire. They gave him 100 men. My father was put in charge of the job, but he went in first to snoop around, and he found what he was hoping to find: blank travel documents, blank ID cards, and official government stamps. So with these documents filled out just the right way by Leon, they could go anywhere they wanted within the sphere of German influence. So in December 1943, they boarded a passenger train and arrived at the Mediterranean port city of Savona, Italy. This is a contemporary picture of Savona, Italy. This was the time that the Germans were occupying northern Italy. That's as far as they could go. Well, there they worked for a construction company, and they felt relatively safe. But my father wanted what he called complete freedom. And even though Leon tried to talk him out of it, he planned his escape to the island of Corsica, which was occupied by the Americans. He bought a motorboat. He hired 2 ex-Italian Navy men to navigate. And he also acquired weapons on the black market. He said he was not going to be taken alive. But in the early morning hours of February 12th, 1944, he was arrested in his hotel room. That was the day he planned to leave. 5 men, a captain, a sergeant, 3 enlisted men of the German secret field police, which was the military equivalent of the Gestapo, made that actual arrest. Well, other soldiers stood guard outside. They took him downstairs, put him in the back of a German staff car, drove him to the military garrison in Savona, questioned him for hours, and then locked him in a cell. He escaped that night and went up into the mountains to the west of Savona. Okay, let me tell you. Let me go off my plan route. I'll tell you how he escaped. Okay. He escaped. They took him to that garrison. After questioning him, turned him over to a jailer who he knew, because when he and Leon first came to Savona, the company had no place for them to stay, and they put him up in the military barracks for a while. He got to know this guy. And so he's standing there in front of the desk where the sergeant, I think it was the sergeant, was sitting, and he pulled out his wallet, took out all the money, and said, "Here, this is yours." And then took out 2 pictures that he was carrying with him. One picture was his son that I showed you. The other picture was that little girl that I showed you. And he says, "These are my 2 children back in Berlin with their mother. I'd like to keep them with me in the cell." So they let them keep the pictures. That's how we have those pictures. They put him in a cell that had 2 deserters from the German army. He tried talking to them, but they were suspicious of him. At lunchtime, they let him out into the courtyard, and he was walking around trying to figure out how to get out of there. And then afterwards, he talked to them again and convinced them that we need to get out of here, that they were going to be either shot or sent to the Russian front where they'd be killed anyway. And They agreed to help him when he showed him the gun that he had smuggled into prison. He said he always wore a small pistol strapped behind his right knee under his trousers. And they didn't search him properly. Oh, I forgot to tell you, when they turned him over to that sergeant, he pulled his pockets inside out to show the man he didn't have anything with him, and he wouldn't pat it down. So came time to go out to eat for dinner, and he stayed in his cot, pretending he was sick. And when the other men came back, and later that night, after the guards changed at 9 o'clock at night, they waited. He started moaning, and one of those German prisoners went to the jail cell door and got the attention of the jailer. This man's sick. You have to come help him. And this stupid guard walked right in, came to my father, who pulled the gun on him, didn't shoot him, knocked him out with the gun, took the keys, and the three of them left, went out into the courtyard, and my father had formulated his escape plan earlier and now put it into practice. There was an outhouse against the courtyard wall. He opened that door, and they used the door as a ladder to scramble up and get over the wall. Then went up into the mountains. That's how he got out. Okay. I'm glad you asked. So he's now up in the mountains, and after a few days, let me show you one more picture. This is where he stayed, a cave. Can't see the cave there, but the arrow points out the location. This is high up in the mountains, a isolated cave, hard to get to. A farm family showed him that cave, and he stayed there. But they also told him something about his arrest. So he found out from them why the Germans had used really elaborate precaution in arresting him. Why they treated him with courtesy, why they just didn't take him out in the street and shoot him. And that's because they thought they had captured a famous British spy. Get that wrong. But he also found out that Leon had been arrested later that day. Well, he spent several weeks living in that cave before he was approached by a group of armed men. He knew who they were. They were the partisans. They asked him to come with them. So he went with them. They took him a few miles away to a house where he met a high-ranking officer in the Italian partisan army. They called their army the Voluntary Liberation Corps of the Committee for National Liberation. That was the army. And he was very eager to join the partisans. But after a long discussion, he was astonished when they asked him not just to join, but to assume command of one of their units that was active in those mountains, but had recently lost their leader in battle. He understood the reason that they wanted him is that there were several men in that detachment who were vying in position to become the leader. And they figured to maintain harmony in the group, they needed an outsider to come in and take charge. And his prior experience as an officer in the Polish army and his recently demonstrated prowess by escaping from the German military jail, he fit the bill. So he agreed. And thereafter, he became known only as Commandante Enrico. All the partisans went with an assumed name, an alias. He chose Enrico for himself. So here is a picture of Commandante Enrico in the middle. In the background, that was his mountain cave. He turned that into his command headquarters. No, I visited the cave. It's very, very small. Very small. That was where he worked out of. Now he was put in charge of a group of 117 men formed what was called a detachment. And the role of that detachment in the partisan army was to aggressively attack enemy convoys and troops that were passing through the mountains. But they were not very effective. In the beginning, they were only fighting with single shot rifles and bolt action rifles, but later, under my father's planning, and leadership, they started becoming effective. And soon they were fighting with captured German automatic weapons. And then much later, with British and American weapons that were airdropped to them by the Allies. In this picture, my father is holding a British-made submachine gun. As they become more successful, their numbers grew. More and more local Italians joined. So my father split up his growing detachment into several different detachments, and then later grouped various detachments into 4 separate brigades, each with its own brigade commander. He himself assumed command of the 4th Brigade of the Garibaldi, with about 600 men and a few women partisan fighters. Later, the high command ordered him to join those 4 brigades together into a single unified fighting force, a division that he was to command. And that's how my father became a division commander in the Italian partisan army with about 2,500 troops under his command. This is an artifact of the time when he was a division commander. It's a military order that he signed right here under the military commander. I always find it amazing that up there in the mountains, they had letterhead stationery and a typewriter. He had a secretary. This message shows where it came from. The division, the 1st Garibaldi Assault Division, was named for a Gin Bevilacqua. He was the original commander of that detachment that had been killed and named the division after him. But this was a communication to his sub-commanders telling them that the enemy now has a new device at their checkpoints where they can send an alarm signal to neighboring checkpoints by just stepping on a foot switch. And before they attack the checkpoints, they need to disable the alarm by cutting the wires, but make sure you don't cause a short circuit. That was the message. Well, on April 24th, 1945, he received a message that he was the next day to take his troops down out of the mountains and help with the liberation of the city of Savona. He didn't save that message, but he saved this one. It was a follow-up that came later that day. It came from the liaison officers of the Allied headquarters. The stamp at the bottom shows it was from the British military mission. And it asked him to detonate some mines on a certain road, and also asked if they, the liaison officers, could join him in coming down out of the mountains the next day. So liberation took place, and what right this time? No. This picture was taken 1 week after liberation on May Day, during a May Day celebration in the main town square. And there my father is in his full partisan uniform, that insignia of rank above his shirt pocket indicates he was a lieutenant colonel in their army. He never wore that up in the mountains. Want to be known that he was the commander, he was captain. Well, at this time, he was working for the city of Savona as a police inspector. And he was also in charge of 200 of his former fighters who were now assisting the local police in maintaining law and order. A week later, the regular Italian army arrived. And here he is in a ceremony with that it was a regiment, that regiment's commander, a colonel, in which he turned over the policing duties from partisan to regular Italian army. After that, the 2 officers reviewed a parade of their combined forces, and then he gave a speech from a 2nd floor balcony. That's him behind the microphone. Look at those speakers. He gave a speech to about 35,000 people assembled in the picture of some of the crowd. It was a very powerful and patriotic speech. There's the speech. It's all in Italian. He brought it with him when he came to the U.S. I've got a translation of one little section I'll read to you. The Italian people have won the battle. The Italian partisans, through their fierce resistance, which left thousands of them dead in the field and as many wounded, have accelerated the death sentence of the power, both material and moral, of the common enemy, and in doing so have spared the blood of the glorious Allied forces. He had a way with words, all his life. He soon began receiving awards and decorations. You can read the title of this one. It's Certificate to the Patriots. He got this certificate. This was issued jointly by the British and the Italian governments. The last sentence translates, in the reborn Italy, the bearers of this certificate will be proclaimed as patriots who fought for honor and freedom. Over the next year, he was issued 4 separate ID cards, each for a different purpose. The one in the upper left, that was his partisan veteran ID card. These were the first legitimate ID cards he carried in 6 years. Then in June, early June of 1946, this telegram arrived in the police station in Savona. My father was still working for the police as an inspector. It asked the person named down below, my father, to report on the 25th of June to a certain address in Milan, Italy, to receive instructions regarding the receipt of an American Decoration for Valor. The last sentence translates, he is advised to wear his partisan uniform. So my father went, and there he is. His picture was taken moments after United States General Mark Clark pinned an American Bronze Star on his chest. And that event prompted him to select the United States of America to be his new home. And it also greatly facilitated his acquisition of an immigration visa. Well, here are my parents, Herman and Ray Wygoda, picture taken on their wedding day in Chattanooga in 1947. When they met, my mother was a widow with a 5-year-old daughter named Lois, who my father adopted after they got married. On the left, you see Lois sitting next to my mother, and in my father's lap is my other sister, Sylvia, who was born in 1948. And I'm the baby on the right. I was born in 1951. This is my father's certificate of naturalization. He became a United States citizen on April 29, 1952. He loved and supported his new country. He was a true patriot. Let me give you one example. Every summer, he would pack us up in his station wagon and drive us around the country to show us what he called this great nation. We saw the Golden Gate Bridge, the Alamo, Mount Rushmore. We went the Liberty Bell. We went inside the Statue of Liberty, the Washington Monument, and we went inside the White House. There were these and many, many other trips we took as a family. There he is with the station wagon. He became a general contractor in Chattanooga who specialized in the development of subdivisions and the design, building, and sale of homes in those subdivisions. Today, there are hundreds of families in the Chattanooga area who live in houses that he built in the 1950s and 1960s. Now, this has been a story of not just one survivor, one resistor who survived, but 2. That's Leon Perigal, the man who faked the ID cards. This picture was taken in the 1950s of Leon and his wife, Janisa, in Canada. Leon had escaped from that jail after many weeks, and he walked all the way to Switzerland to freedom. He never could get a visa to come to the US, but he got one to come to Canada. He and my father reunited, and I got to meet Leon when I was a boy. Now, I'm going to end with one very special photograph, one that I took myself in 1967 at the World's Fair in Montreal. This is the only picture that exists that shows Herman Wygoda and Leon Perigal together in the same picture. This picture was taken, my father was 60 years old, Leon was 54, and I will say, may their memories be a blessing. Thank you.
There any questions that people might have? Now would be a good time.
Yeah.
Bevilacqua.
Yes, and her husband Oscar was
I don't know what the Jim Middleton did before the war. But, we have his picture somewhere.
How did your dad retain his diary, his stories, all of that?
Kept everything. And that telegram that came to the police station, saved that. And there's many, many other documents
He was in prison.
that were important to him. Kept them all. Well, he didn't write his memoir until after he
Okay.
escaped.
Okay,
Yeah, that wasn't until 1945. He actually started writing it before the war was over.
okay.
He says that
So he wasn't, okay,
No.
so you don't,
the only thing that he had with him were those two little pictures
okay,
in jail.
I got it.
All the other
Was memory, yeah.
yeah. He didn't talk about this. He couldn't talk about it. Oh, yeah. Almost everything I told you, I learned from reading his memoir. Although I once asked him something, and well, back up. The reason I didn't ask him questions when I was growing up is this: when I was maybe 3 years old, something. I was in our parents' bedroom. I was walking around. My mother was in there doing something, and suddenly I came face to face with this little picture in a frame of Samuel. It was on the nightstand of my father's side of the bed. It was right in front of my face. And I turned to my mother. I said, "Who's that little boy?" And she turned around in an incredibly harsh voice. Said, "That was your father's first son. He was killed in the war. Don't ask him any questions." Well, that did it for me. I wasn't going to ask him questions. So
Wow.
the only time I asked him really anything, I must have been in the fourth grade of school. The other boys in the playground were talking about what their fathers had done during the war. So I came home, I said, "Daddy, what'd you do in the war?" And we were in his office, which was in our home, and he opened up a drawer and he pulled out a picture, not the one I showed you with the machine gun, but another one. There were several pictures taken at the same time of him. And he said, he told me he was a guerrilla fighter. That's where he guerrilla fighter in Italy, and I had no idea what he was talking about to explain what the partisans were. And I asked him, what was his rank? And he told me Lieutenant Colonel. And I said, "You win any medals?" He showed me the Bronze Star. And I said, "Were you ever wounded?" And he said, "Yes." And then he lied to me. He didn't want to tell me about anything that happened in Poland.
Hmm.
So he led me to believe he was wounded when he was with the partisans in Italy. And he rolled up the pant leg on his right leg and in the back and the calf. He showed me the scar. But that was about it. Mhm. I don't know. Like I say, for
Mark?
him, he said, use holes in the wall. That was about it. I don't know. Other people use sewers. He might have to. Oh, really? What was the name of the book?
You could repeat the question before, so the people online can hear. I do have a few online
Okay.
questions. Yeah.
Why? question is, what identity did he use when he was posing as a Volksdeutscher, and did he use the same identity in Berlin? All I know is that, well, I don't know what he called himself in, when he was a Volksdeutscher, you know, but when he and Leon would get a hold of a stolen ID card, they would assume the names of the person that was on that card, and they would just change the picture. And you may have noticed or not that the picture of Leon on that card, there was like a rubber stamp that went over the paper and the picture. Well, he used his artistic talent to draw in the stamp that was over their picture, that part, and match what was there. At what point did he learn Italian? Well, as soon as he got to Italy, and he mentions in his memoir that when they first got there, and they reported to a construction company as representatives sent from the home office in Berlin, but not their own company in Berlin. They found another company that had an outfit in Savona, and they were accepted. They didn't check them out because they needed workers, but there was this construction was very slow in the beginning. There wasn't much going on. He said he devoted every moment to learning Italian. He had a knack for language. Yeah. I mean, he spoke Polish and German and learned Italian. He knew Russian. He knew a little French. And then he learned English. So he had a talent like that. Yeah. Yes.
I'm gonna do a little math. What was the age difference?
Oh, the age difference. Okay, 34 and 44. That's 10, 6, 17 years.
Question online, and you just kind of answered it, is how many different languages did your father speak?
It's like,
Question from Alex Core online, who you know. Yeah. As a child, did you face anti-Semitism in Chattanooga?
one incident of anti-Semitism that I remember wasn't when we were on vacation to Indiana. Yes, we went to, because my sisters both went to school in Bloomington, and sister met her husband there, and his family lived in Indianapolis. It was probably in Indianapolis when one day they took us to an ice skating rink. I'd never ice skated in my life, so I went around. And I remember I was with my sister Sylvia. We're walking along outside the rink, but inside the building somewhere, and just out of nowhere, some girl, teenage girl, said something to me. It was anti-Semitic. I don't know where that came from, but nothing like that happened to me in Chattanooga. Yes, question.
Your father's tale is so incredible, all of the different circumstances.
Right.
That it made me wonder, has the book been targeted by Holocaust?
No, the question is, the book been targeted by Holocaust deniers? No, not that I know of at all.
That would make an amazing movie.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wish someone in this audience would make it into a movie.
When you were.
Yeah, when he was arrested. Well, yeah, I mentioned it. They thought he was a spy. They thought he was there was a British spy that was supposed to be in the area, and they thought he was the British spy. Yeah.
Mhm.
If it would be one thing that you could ask your dad, that one of those things that outside of the first hand account, you have no way of knowing what would that
I would ask him far more details about his family. I don't know much about his family. I know some names. I know that his grandfather in Kothoff was a blacksmith,
I know that. I don't know. I know his name, but that's, I don't know anything about their personality. I don't know anything about it. That's what I'm finding.